Hello, my name is Mara and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Well, howdy. It is time for another reading project. I am filming this at the beginning of 2020, and I am about to embark on a project to finish up Kresley Cole's Immortals After Dark series, which, if you don't know, is a very beloved paranormal romance series that was started, I think, in sort of the mid-aughts, so is about 15 years old at this point, the beginning of the series. This year in 2020, there is going to be the long-awaited, I think, 19th book in it. Basically, the backstory on this is that the author, Kresley Cole, has been writing the series for about 15 years, but she has taken a break for the last like 3-ish years. So it's been a while since people have gotten a new Immortals After Dark series book. And since this has been a series sort of just that's like an albatross on my TBR, because I went on a buying spree of them about 4 or 5 years ago. All of the ones that had been released up to that point went on sale in anticipation of the publication of Sweet Ruin. So I got all the Immortals After Dark series for $1.99 each. So I have all of these books, and I made it about 6-ish books in before I just sort of lost steam. And I think we can talk about those first 6 books maybe here in a minute, but basically I kind of lost steam with it, and it's one of those series I always mean to get back to, but because it's a series that I like but don't love, I just never seem to make time for it. And I think my real mistake was that I allowed myself to pause it with the book that I had liked least up to that point. That was a mistake, I think, tactically on my part. I think I should have just kept pushing through to get beyond that. But I think in my mind, I was like, ugh, maybe this just means they're not that good after this point. I think subsequently I've come to realize that I don't think that's the case. In fact, I think it's book 10 or 11, which is called LOTHAIRE. And that is like the book in the fandom. Like that is the book everybody talks about and loves. I definitely think that there are still good books ahead in this series, but all that to say, one of my goals for this year was to go ahead and finish that series up or catch up with that series in anticipation for this new book that's coming out that's called MUNRO. And so my goal, I've got 9 books left to read in the series. So in theory, my goal is to read 1 a month, which would have me finishing up in September. I can figure out what the exact publication date of MUNRO is. I may try to accelerate that if I want to try to like finish up right when that book is coming out. But I wanted to do this because I was trying to pick a couple of series this year that I thought would be fun to catch up with, because I really enjoyed doing that in 2019 with the In-Depth series. But I wanted to pick something that wasn't quite as like hardcore to try to catch up with, because I've got like 9 books in this series. I'm also going to be reading the Knitting in the City and Winston Brothers series, but those are very light, very easy to slot in. And then some Agatha Christie, I want to finish up her catalog. So those are sort of my like series goals for the year. And between them, I think I can keep things pretty balanced, but I'm going to go ahead and get started on this vlog. Let me go ahead and give you some of my impressions about the first 6 books in this series, some of the prep work I've done to get ready for this. So the premise of the Immortals After Dark series, it is a paranormal romance series. It is not just werewolves, it's not just vampires, it's not just fae, it's all of them, bitch. This is a paranormal world where we got all of the paranormal creatures. We've got Valkyries, very notably, and my personal favorite are the Valkyries. They're a big contingent. There are these genetic witches, so they're not just Wiccan, they are actually like a species. Witches. There are vampires, but there's different kinds of vampires. There's vampires who drink directly from the vein and they basically go crazy and they're like the big bads of this world. And then there's also I think they're called the Forebearers, who don't drink directly from the veins, so they haven't gone crazy yet, but they kind of live in this like nebulous, they could go bad at any time situation. There are demons, there are nymphs. What else? Good lord. There's fae, there are ghosts, there's phantoms. Every ooky spooky creature that you could be for Halloween exists in this world. And it is called collectively the Lore. And the Lore are they're all immortals, hence Immortals After Dark. They have like there's a bunch of world building things in this book. There's also, I should mention, there's also like pagan gods and goddesses kind of thing that exists also. There's a lot of world building that unfolds slowly over the books. And really each of these books are about a different fated mate pairing, getting together, and they're fated mates from like across the lore. And I'm not my remembrance of this is that it is not necessarily that usual for there to be so much inter-lore pairings. And the reason why all of these pairings are happening at the point where the series picks up is that there is about to be this thing called the Ascension, which again, I'm a little like confused about what it is. Maybe we'll talk about that more as things go on. I think one of the weaknesses of this book is clear world building. We'll talk more about that. Basically what I can surmise is that roughly every 500 years, the accession happens, and it's basically like kind of a mini Armageddon or Ragnarok kind of situation where all the different lore factions kind of just get together and duke it out, and the outcome of the accession for that go round sort of dictates how things are going to go for the next 500 years. So right before then is when a lot of new alliances are happening, when a lot of fated mates are finding each other. It's sort of just like a crescendo every 500 years of these immortals' life. So there's a lot of sort of like political machinations happening, people sort of like gerrymandering, trying to get themselves well situated for this upcoming big battle. And so that's sort of like the backdrop from which all of these new pairings are happening is you're definitely seeing couples getting together, but you're also seeing sort of the different pieces of the chessboard getting set up in anticipation for this big ass battle. And I'm not sure if we're ever going to actually get to see that, but that is sort of the overall series plot. Now, in terms of kind of how I did with the first round of them, I would say when I first started reading the series, I liked but didn't love it. And the things that kept me from loving it were a couple of things. One, these books have a very specific comedic tone that you're either going to like or you're not going to like. I say that I'm somebody who kind of does fall in the middle. Sometimes in some of the books, her comedy does work for me, and in other times, it comes off a little contrived, I think. The other thing that this book does, and actually in this respect, it reminds me quite a bit of the first Kate Daniels book, but the Kate Daniels series course corrected in the next book, is that there is a lot of world happening. Like, it's very clear she's got a lot of ideas for the sort of magical systems in this universe, but she takes an approach to communicating that is very like show don't tell. So she'll just sort of throw out terms, she'll mention groups, she'll mention past events. And I don't think that there's often enough kind of hand-holding of the reader for you to feel confident that you know what's going on. So what happens is that there is a lot of times in these books where I'm sitting there thinking, am I supposed to know what that is? Am I supposed to already, did this get discussed in a previous book? I don't think it did, but maybe it did. I don't know. Let me go like Fanpedia this real quick. That there's not a very clear communication of the world. But with that being said, there is this like very bingeable quality to these books. Like they're very compulsively readable. I do think that there's actually a lot of really thoughtful character dynamics happening. Like she does a really good job of bringing two people together who have a lot of either sort of like intrinsic conflict just based on the types of species they are, or whose backstories create a lot of conflict. So these are higher angst books than I would normally go for, but because she does have that light comedic tone, it never feels like super sad to me. Like there's definitely emotional moments, but I don't feel just like bummed reading them. A few of these books that I've read so far, I actually really liked. I was going back and looking through the ratings. Most of these I gave at least a 4-star, and I gave one a 5-star, though I think actually 2 of them probably should have 5 stars. The 2 that I like the best so far, and guys, the titles of these books are terrible because you can never remember them. But I think the 2 that I'm thinking of is A Hunger Like No Other, where it's, the werewolf king getting together with a half Valkyrie, half vampire. I think that one is excellent, and it's the first book in the series. I think thematically there's a lot of really interesting things happening in that book, and just overall it's a really fun paranormal romance. And then I also like the one with Bowen and Marrakesh. He's a werewolf who thinks he already found and lost his fated mate. And then all of a sudden a new one shows up. And her name is Markesha, and she is a witch, and she's like this chosen one. She's like going to be a big player in the accession. They get together, and I think that book is also excellent. I think it's Wicked Deeds on a Winter's Night. So those 2 I think are really good. I also, even though there's some interesting consent issues in the Warlord Once Forever, I did like that one. I like the one with the Phantom and the vampire that was in there. There's basically a big trial happening in the first parts of these books that's basically like the paranormal version of The Amazing Race. So there's a goddess putting on like this trial, and the object is a key that can make you go back in time and change things. So there's like one book set during that's really good. Like I liked most of those. I was enjoying it. And then I got to Cade's book, the first demon book, and I did not like it hardly at all. I kept reading because they were like, I liked the heroine, but the consent issues in this book are nuts, and I just couldn't get on. I see what she was trying to do. Like, I think she was trying to like explore consent, but it just never fully came together for me. So I really like the heroine in this one. She is a Valkyrie, but she didn't know she was a Valkyrie, so she's like being awakened, and she's matched up with this demon guy who is trying to restore the throne taken from his brother, and I just couldn't deal with him. Like, I just didn't like him really at all, and I was rooting for her, but I was not rooting for them together. So I was like, ugh, okay, the next book after it is about this guy's brother, and I didn't like the brother in this book, so I was like, I don't want to read immediately about another guy I don't like, so let me skip ahead one. So I skipped ahead to a novella that was actually 300 pages, so not really a novella, like a short novel, called Untouchable, which was good, but not great. Like, it was a fine installment, but it wasn't the best, and with that, I just sort of ran out of steam. All that being said, I have been gearing up to re-engage with the series, so I have been listening to a podcast that I now love called Fated Mates, which is hosted by Sarah MacLean, who is an excellent writer of historical romance. Her books are not my thing because they're too angsty for me, but they're very well done, like on a writing level, and like overall people love her. Her books are great. So she hosts it along with a reviewer, like a romance critic named Jen. Jen Reads Romance if you are on Romancelandia Twitter. It's a great podcast, and listening to them talk about these books so thoughtfully and so analytically is what has actually inspired me to go ahead and make a vlog of this, because I do think that there will be enough meat for me to talk about these books. I'm not planning on getting too spoilery in these. I want to talk more about sort of my impressions and the themes versus like what happens. If I'm ever going to talk about a spoiler, I will put that up on the screen. But yeah, I think that this will be an interesting reading project. I hope anyway. If it's not, I guess you just will never see this video. But I'm excited to like kind of come back to this series with a fresh lens. Listening to those podcasts has definitely helped me like refresh on some of the like plot things that I may have forgotten. And I think that it also has got me in the right mindset to be open to the series in a new way. So all that to say, I have all of the books up through Sweet Ruin. There are 2 after that, so I don't have those, and we'll see how I do. If I get through this and I'm still enjoying the series, I'll go ahead and grab those and we'll read those as well. But otherwise, I've got 9 books / novellas. I'm not sure if all of them are full length. I've got 9 stories to read, and the first one that we are going to start with is we are picking back up with Kiss of a Demon King, which is with the demon brother who I wasn't sold on. I went back and did a couple of key passage rereads. I don't think he was as bad as I thought at the time. I'm open to it. Like, my heart is open and ready to love these books. Hopefully I do, but let's get into it. Let's go on this journey together, shall we? Okay, we are officially diving in. It is the middle of January. I am starting Kiss of a Demon King, and the opening line is, "Whenever you have a sorcerer betwixt your thighs, your powers tend to disappear." So, reminding me of the boldness of Kresley Cole's dialogue and sort of authorial posture. Stay tuned. We'll see how this goes. Maybe I'm going to get totally hooked and I'll binge it tonight. Maybe it'll be painful and I have to make myself keep going. We'll see. Okay, I'm already feeling a little conflicted about this because the opening scene is set in the 1800s, and it's at an insane asylum in London. I'm not loving the way that the mentally ill are portrayed in this. Now, granted, that's a nitpick, I guess. I don't know. Is it? I'm always a little conflicted about this. Like, it's probably historically accurate for the time, but also this is a paranormal, so like, does that even really matter? Also, in general, historical accuracy is sort of like an illusion, and that's a whole other discussion, but it's a little not great. But it is, I think what I'm remembering, like even just reading this first like 10%, is that writing style in Immortals After Dark is very like stylized. It's very kind of self-satisfied, I guess, uncharitably, and like kindly, I guess that it's meant to be very clever. And there's moments where it is clever, and there's other moments where I feel like it's like needlessly complicated or like needlessly vague about what is going on. So like, I'm remembering this, and then I do mostly like the humor in here. I read you that opening line. And like, there's this moment where she says, "Without the use of sorcery, the girls were starving. Sabine was now 16 and old enough to begin doing what any girl like her would." Mortal crossed her arms over her chest and knowingly said, prostitution. Wrong. Commercial fishing. So, I mean, like, that I like. I like it when it's more in that mode. I don't know. We'll see how I keep doing, but I'm already, like, remembering how conflicted I feel whenever I read these books about whether or not I, in fact, actually like them or just, like, want to like them. Okay, guys, I'm sorry. I got pretty sucked into this thing, and I kind of forgot that I was supposed to be updating you until I paused to take a shower. I only have, like, 15 or 10%, like 10 to 15% of this book left. Right now, I can't decide if I want to give it like a 2-star or a 4-star. This book is doing some really interesting things in terms of playing with our feeling of likability for the main characters. There's a lot of, so this is definitely an enemies to lovers, which you guys know is not my favorite. So just in terms of like my personal taste, it feels like a 2-star kind of book. In terms of like taking a lot of like dubious consent, a lot of like genuine hate or dislike, and how that's transformed into their dynamic, I do think is really interesting. I also think that the family dynamics in this book are really good. Like, that's my favorite part. I really like everything to do with Sabine and Lantha. I love that. Like, it's basically an entire storyline about having, like, coming from an abusive home and domestic violence, honestly. I think the interplay between them and, like, Omart, who like can eat a dick and die. This guy is the fucking worst, like one of the most dislikable villains I've read in quite some time. He is the worst, and he's also their half brother, so like he's this villain, and there's like some really interesting things about like sibling abuse in there. I'm wishing, or I'm thinking I should have just pushed on from the book right before this, because I think I would have kept going in the series if I'd read them back to back instead of letting myself stall out. I still don't love some of the things that happened in that previous book, especially around like consent and I don't know. So like all the family stuff I think is interesting. I think the parallels or the whole part about the kid in this are interesting. The romance I am struggling with, and then I do think that there's some like problematic things in this book. It is 11 years old at this point, so like I've been doing some reading about the genre, and one thing that I read that I thought was interesting is it usually takes 7 to 8 years for social trends to start re-emerging into romance books, but that is getting shorter all the time, and now it can be something like 5 to 6 years. So like basically best case scenario 2009 romance probably is reflecting like 2003 to 4 kind of social mores. And I think you can definitely see that in this book. I think that there's some like homophobia that I'm a little uncomfortable with. I think I mentioned, I popped on here at the beginning talking about I didn't love like how they were characterizing crazy people. And then there's also some like direct references to slavery. Now granted, this is like a magical world with like crazy ass evil characters, but I don't know. I just think you gotta be real careful bringing that topic up in any capacity. So like, this is why I'm so conflicted. I'm very excited to listen to the Fated Mate podcast on this. I'll do that probably tomorrow because I'm going to sit here and finish up the book right now because I really want to hear what they have to say. I think right now I'm going to see how it ends. I'll pop back on here and let you know if that impacted anything, and then I'll listen to the podcast and give you sort of my final thoughts for this book for right now. Okay, I'm done. I will say I like the ending, and I think the ending makes me, like, it increases my overall enjoyment of the book. I do think though there are some plot holes, so that decreases my, like, admiration of what she's doing. I don't know. I mean, I really like Sabine. I'm so on Rydstrom. Sabine is an unlikable heroine. I'm sure that if I go read the Goodreads, there'll be plenty of things bitching about her. But I think that she seems like, well, she's just real rad. I think I liked her. And then also I just think she makes sense as a character given her kind of circumstances. But so I really liked where the book was leaving her. But like I said, I just think that there are some plot holes in terms of like convenient circumstances / magic-y contrivances. I think maybe I'm gonna go with like a 3 or 3.5. You know, I should go with a 3.5 because this is higher, in my estimation, than an enemies to lover book normally would be. Because like they are legit enemies to lovers. And so like this sold me on that more than books normally can. So let's give it a 3.5 for now. I'll sleep on it. I'll listen to the podcast and I'll circle back with you guys. But for now, I'm going to go with a 3.5. It's an interesting book. And it does make me intrigued to continue. I'm not like chomping at the bit for the next one, but you know, I'm excited to continue on in the project now that I've sort of gotten over the book that was my sort of Damocles in this series. Hey there. So it is the next day and I did indeed get the chance to listen to the totality of the Fated Mates podcast about Kiss of a Demon King, and it kind of helped me give language to some of the things that were bothering me or that I wasn't sure about. It was cool to hear them kind of echo that the book previous to this one was not the best, especially without this book as the immediate follow-on. It kind of put some words and helped me think through some of the consent things that I thought were a little weird in this book. Yeah, it was a really good episode and very clarifying. Oh, well, so the big fat bummer here is that Melanthe or however you say her name, I really like her, and I was like, oh, I hope she gets her own book. Sounds like she does, but with fucking Thronos, so cool, that sucks. Anyway, so yeah, I think I'm gonna land on a 3.5 for this. In terms of ranking, I think I'm gonna put this from, I think that there's 8 of these books or novellas I've read so far. I would put this probably at number 6. So 3.5 stars, number 6 so far. Book 1 down. Let's keep going. Okay, we are officially on to the second book, which is Pleasures of a Dark Prince. I have the audiobook, and I'm hoping that I'm going to enjoy that. Something I've never tried to do with Kresley Cole books before. I think they'll be pretty crazy to listen to be honest, but we'll see how that goes. I do not feel good. I've had stomach issues for a couple of weeks, and it's just real bad here the last couple of days, so I don't know what's going on. I probably should make an appointment with my doctor, but I feel gross. So I'm hoping this will be some light escapism to take my mind off of that, but wish me luck. I have done a little bit of listening, not as much as I wanted to, because homegirl is not feeling great. Went on like this whole epic yesterday with the doctor. I'm still nauseous as fuck, so I don't know what's going on, but I do feel better. And I have been listening when I have been able to focus to the Pleasures of a Dark Prince. I will say that I'm very much enjoying this narrator's Scottish brogue. Definitely brings something to the story. It is interesting because like this is going back in the timeline of the series quite a bit. So like we're back for really before book 1 even happened, because Lachlan's not back with Emma yet. I mean, like this is going basically to the first book in the series. So like I'm interested in that piece. I do think Lucia has it seems like a very dark backstory, which is not uncommon in these books. And right now, as with every book, I'm like, how are you gonna make me get into this? I will say, like, after we did the Ghost and that other Roth brother, what was that, Conrad, I think? Ever since then, the conflicts have just been getting darker and darker, and I think I don't love that. Like, I think I like the version of this series where it's just a little less intense in terms of like why they're not together. Like I liked Lachlan and Emma's conflict because that was sort of like species versus species, and then it evolved into a more personal conflict. I thought that worked. I thought that Sebastian, was that her vampire? I liked their conflict because it was more just they both really want something, and that is what puts them at odds. Conrad and Naomi, literally their conflict is that she's like not corporeal. And then Bowen and Marquetta, their conflict was so delicious. Like it was, he thought he already had his fated mate, so like why is he feeling all these things? Those all I was more on board with. I think part of what I'm struggling with, like the further I get into the series, is that the reasons they're not together or their backstories just getting real grim. I don't know, like Holly and the whole vessel thing was a lot. Like it was a lot to deal with. You know, Sabine I loved, but also her backstory was horrifying. So Lucia, already I'm seeing allusions that her backstory is real horrifying. So maybe, I don't know. I mean, I'm gonna get through this one, and I think I'll commit to at least one more. But I may be realizing that these are just like too dark for me. I don't know. Or maybe I need to just listen to all of the episodes of the Fated Mates podcast first and let myself get spoiled. I don't know. But I'm definitely going to keep going with this one, even though I'm like, oh no, this seems like a lot. And I will check in with you guys when I make some more progress. Just finished Pleasure of a Dark Prince. Do you like my kitten lady sweater? I like this. It's very cozy. And I very much enjoyed it, ultimately. It's interesting because I think as much as I did end up liking this book, and I did like the audio, by the way. I think about probably half of it audio, half of it reading on my e-reader. As much as I ended up liking this book, I probably would give it like 4 stars. I think it did clarify for me that I don't want to read all of these books. What I like in the Immortals After Dark series are the specific groups. I like a I like a Valkyrie, and I like a Forebearer. Like those are the groups that I'm into. I don't like the super dark ones. And just based on what I've heard about the series, I think that some of these books coming up get real dark. The other thing that I really like in the series is a hero in pursuit trope, which this book 100% has. And when that's the setup, I can forgive a lot. The ones where it is not a hero in pursuit trope, it gets harder for me. And I just did a quick scan through of the descriptions of some of the upcoming books. And like, especially Lothaire, reading that description, I'm like, that doesn't sound like my kind of book. It just doesn't. Like, I don't like power imbalance to be so great. I just don't think I'm gonna like it. And so I think what I might do is I'm gonna start listening to the Fated Mate podcasts for the books that I don't think I want to read. If in listening to the podcast it gets me excited enough about that specific book to read it, then I will do it. But the only one that looking through the upcoming descriptions that I'm like, yeah, I think I want to read that is MacRieve. And that's honestly because it's a Like-A. It's a Like-A hero, and I like the Like-As. In this world, by the way, the Like-As are werewolves. So I'll read MacRieve, but there's like 3 or 4 books in between. How many? I forget, but there's a few books between now and MacRieve, so I'm just gonna listen to the podcast. And like I said, if I get excited enough from the podcast, maybe I'll go ahead and read it. But I just don't, like, the next one I think is about one of these half vampire, half demon things. I don't know. So anyway, that was a clarifying moment. That being said, in terms of Pleasures of a Dark Prince in particular, I did really end up liking this book. I thought it was actually very interesting structurally because the first third of it, maybe the first 40%, is trotting over ground we've already seen, and we already saw it in the very first book, but we're seeing it from Lucia and Gareth's perspective. I really liked that. Oh, sorry. It looks like my lighting is getting weird here. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with my lighting. It's like when it's on this camera, it's really warm. I don't know. Anyway, Gareth and Lucia, yeah, so you see the first 40% is a story we've already seen in the first book, but from their perspective. And then it flash cuts forward a year, and we basically get kind of like a suspense plot. Like, it's almost like an isolated close circle suspense, because they're all trapped on this little boat in the Amazon. And yeah, I ended up really quite liking them as a couple. I felt like I understood why she wasn't telling him things. Like, it's a miscommunication trope somewhat, but like, I get why she's lying to him about things. Her trauma is profound. And like I was saying, I think early on in this reading of this book, I'm not sure that I'm always super comfortable with how dark backstories are for this kind of book. I don't know. I need to think about it a little bit more. It's very late, so I think I'm going to go take a shower. I'm going to listen to a little bit of the Fated Mates podcast, and once I'm done listening to that, I will come back and give you my final thoughts and my ranking. But as things stand right now, I am liking this idea of just giving up on reading every single one. That, like, I don't know. I just think back on Kiss of a Demon King. While I really like Sabine, I didn't really love that book beyond her. I appreciated it, but I didn't enjoy it. And these are books that are meant to be fun. So, I don't know. Let me sleep on it.
Well, hey, I'm filming something else, so I thought I would just use this official setup to talk to you guys about the fact that, yes, okay, so I finished listening to the Fated Mates podcast about the book, and it helped me cement a few things. So first, it did remind me that I don't think I mentioned that I liked in this book that we do get a lot more talk about what the accession is and what's going to happen with it, and we kind of get more things going in that big macro plot. It also was helpful because they have read the whole series, so they can give some perspective on this, that this book apparently is sort of transitioning from the first movement of the series into the second and third movements. The way that they're talking about that does not make me excited to read. So I do think that I'm going to listen to a few of these Fated Mates podcasts. That's sort of like my next step, is I'm going to just, because I'm somewhat spoiler immune in terms of it doesn't bother me if I know everything that happens. I'm more interested in the journey to get there. So I'm going to listen to a few of these podcasts for the upcoming books to get a sense of if these upcoming books are ones that I want to read. Like, I do think that that's the right path forward. So there's that. But that being said, I'll check back in with you guys once I've done that and talk about kind of where where my head's at for future books. For Pleasures of a Dark Prince, I actually really like this book. I would give it 4 stars. I don't know quite where that would fall in my ranking, but I think it would be somewhere probably in the middle at this point then. I really like how Lucia has a very strong sense of mission, and they talked about this in the podcast, and it made me think about it and agree that I really like that she specifically is like, no, what my work in this world is really important. Like, basically her job is to keep an apocalypse from happening in each accession. Like, that's her job. And she needs her archery skills to be able to do that. And the times where Gareth tries to like downplay that or not value that the way that he should, it's very clear that both Lucia, I never know how to say her name, Huntress Gal, isn't here for that. She's not going to let him downplay the value of her gift, and she's not going to let him try to say that he can just do it for her, because he can't just do it for her. And so I liked that element. I do really like I really like the push-pull between the characters in this one, where all he wants to do is protect her, but he doesn't really understand what that involves or what that means fully. And I think that she had valid reasons why she didn't want to tell him. Like, there is some level of a miscommunication trope in this one, but it's one I buy because it's born out of a deep sense of shame. And I believed that. Like, I bought that part of her backstory or her characterization. So yeah, I thought that this was a good one. I liked how action-packed it was. Like, I think I've realized that in these books, I do very much prefer when the hero is in strong pursuit of the heroine. So I think that's what I'm going to be listening for in these podcasts, of which of these remaining books has a strong element of the hero really wanting to be with the heroine. And those are going to be the ones I read, because I have heard from other readers and then in allusions in this podcast that like shit gets really real in the later parts of these books. Like, there's a lot of like, I think, torture and a lot of like really intense situations. We've already started seeing that in some of the backstories. And I think if you layer on top of that then their fated mate hates them, it's a lot for me to take in these books, considering they're supposed to be paranormal romance fun. The contrast here between my enjoyment level of Kiss of a Demon King and Pleasures of a Dark Prince is that even though that is an intense backstory, and even though they are like going through it in this book, he fundamentally is in pursuit of her. And I think that carries a lot for me in these books. So that is what I'm going to listen for. That's what I'm going to be looking for in the books. We'll see what happens. Stay tuned. Okay, checking in a couple of days later. So, where are we at? I did listen to all of the Fated Mate podcasts for the remaining books in the series, and it was very helpful. So I think where I have landed is that so from what I can tell now, there are 3 movements basically in the Immortals After Dark series. Pleasures of a Dark Prince was sort of the transitional one into the second movement, and I think I've realized listening to these podcasts that mostly the second movement I'm not that interested in. It's what they call Torture Island. It seems like it's real dark and a lot about the heroes not being great to the heroines, and it's not what I come to my paranormal romance for, basically. So the second movement, I'm pretty much only going to read Demon from the Dark, which is the next book, so I will still read the next book. I thought I was just going to read the end of MacRieve. I ended up reading the prologue and the last third of it, and then I went back and like skim read the rest of it. So I've actually already read MacRieve, and I didn't really talk to you guys about that until now, because I thought it was just going to be a quick in and out thing. If I was going to give it a rating based on what I read, I would say 3 stars, because it is dark. I'm really happy with the parts that I chose to read. It was enough for me. There was not nearly enough of a grovel in that book for me to feel okay about kind of the totality of it. So I'm glad I did not invest like the full time into that book, but I did read the last third and enjoyed that. Got some key setup points. I'm actually quite interested in the MUNRO book now. So MacRieve just accidentally happened. I'm going to do a similar thing with LOTHAIRE. I don't think I can take a full book of LOTHAIRE based on what they were talking about in that podcast episode. That just doesn't sound like what I want from this series. I don't need to read Dreams of a Dark Warrior at all, I think. I don't need to read Shadow's Claim at all, I think. And I don't need to read Dark Sky at all, I think. Kronos, what an asshat. I didn't like him in Kiss of a Demon King. I don't need a whole book of him, which is too bad because Melanthe was good. I really liked her in Kiss of a Demon King, but I don't want to read a whole book of him. That didn't sound great. So the ones that I am going to read in full going forward, of the ones that I own, I am going to read
Demon from the Dark in full, and I'm going to read Sweet Ruin in full because Sweet Ruin sounds great. Basically, so I should finish my thought, which was the second movement doesn't really sound like it's for me. This third movement sounds like I'm going to be way more into. So Sweet Ruin, I'm definitely going to read. Demon from the Dark sounds like he's just like a big dumb teddy bear who needs love. So that I can get down with. And then Wicked Abyss also sounds good. So I don't own that one. I'm going to have to get that from the library. But of the ones I own, I'm going to read Demon from the Dark, Sweet Ruin, get Wicked Abyss from the library, do like an ending, reading the ending of Lothaire, and I think I can just let the rest go. So this project has now somewhat shrunk because I have eliminated books, but that's good because part of what I was wanting to do with this whole challenge was like do something with the books left in this series and not just have them hanging over me. So I think I have a clear path forward. I've got 3 full books left to read. And then I think I will read MUNRO when it comes out because I'm very intrigued by the setup that we got at the end of MacRieve. So it's good to know that I'm interested in that, and I think that will sort of be my approach with this series going forward. Hey, I just voted. It's early on a Saturday morning. I voted. I went to Target just now and Trader Joe's. I've done it all. I got through the podcasts I wanted to listen to on those errands, so now it is time for me to dive in to my next Immortals After Dark pick, which is Demon from the Dark, which I am going to listen at least in part to on audio because today I'm doing a bunch of, I've been doing errands. I'm doing a bunch of house stuff. I am excited about this one. My expectation going in is that Homeboy is sort of like an abused circus animal. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting in terms of like his character type. He is like super fucking strong and alpha, I think, but he's been like chronically abused. So I think the heroine is going to help him find love and reconnect with that part of himself. This is on what is referred to as Torture Island. Most of those books I am skipping because based on my listening to the Fated Mates podcast, I was like, I don't need any of that. I just don't. I don't think I'll enjoy it. What I read of LOTHAIRE and MacRieve validated that choice. So this is really the only full Torture Island book I will be listening to. Stay tuned for more thoughts on Demon from the Dark. Okay, updates. So I have listened to, I think, like probably 15 or 20% so far. I'm really liking this, but oh my gosh, Kresley Cole, like this gets into what I think we've discovered on this journey together, which is just like the shit in this series is just too real. And it makes sense because these immortals are so powerful. You have to give them like truly horrifying, torturous things to generate conflict. But like Malcolm's past is just so awful. And now Caro is gonna have to go try to get him, I guess. I'm sure they're fated mates, so like I'm sure that will be going down here in a minute, but like just all of it, Torture Island, I'm so, with the little taste of Declan we've gotten, I'm so pleased with my choice to mostly skip this. Yeah, I don't know, it's a lot, but I'm enjoying it. Like I'm into it so far, so that's a good sign, so stay tuned. I'm to the part in my editing where I can no longer listen to an audiobook, so I'll pick up either the audio or my ebook here in a little bit. Okay, so same day, and I ended up finishing the whole thing because I could not put it down once I kind of hit critical mass. So I listened to the audiobook up through about 40-ish% of the book, and then I switched to my e-edition, and this is one of the best books in the series, I think. I'll sit with it. We'll see where it ends up landing. But I'm thinking like 4.5 stars. I think that this book actually has one of the most interesting power dynamics I've ever seen set up in a romance, in terms of it really fleshing out the push-pull in a situation where Homeboy is super alpha, like just basically based on his species, and the heroine is also so competent, powerful in her own right. And they both are so wronged, and therefore in a situation where they end up wronging each other, but it feels balanced in a way that I think in some of these books it doesn't. In some of these books it's going for that of like, oh, we both are hurting each other, and we basically like we have to find a way to kind of like move past that and be together. The problem is I think very often the balance is off, and the hero has done far worse things by the end of the book to the heroine than she has done to him. This is a situation where I think it's balanced just right, because he is so like, my heart for sweet little Malcolm, because he has been so just wronged over and over again in his life. He was abused. He was just like, everybody has betrayed him. Literally, he's known almost no kindness in his entire life. He literally not accidentally, but he like burns himself doing something for her, and she's like, oh my gosh, and sort of is mother henning him, and he purposely sticks his hand back in the fire just so that she will touch him with like compassion and affection again. So like, that's the level of like just broken and starving for love that this hero is on. And then she's in this impossible situation where she's got to be protecting this girl who has suddenly come into her care. Like, she's now her guardian, basically. She's like her new mom, and she like unwaveringly has to do what's right for her, and that puts them at cross purposes. And I just think that the push-pull was so perfectly executed. I also just love this. I love them both. I think that's the other thing. In these books, the ones that I really like are the ones where I really like both the hero and the heroine. In so many of these books, I very much am like, ugh, okay. The hero is fine, but I really like the heroine. This is one where I love them both. What I love about him, I mean, he's like the most powerful immortal that we have met so far, but he is also somehow a cinnamon roll at his core. I love her because she is just so self-assured in her own ability to like make it work. Like, she swears to this little girl, like, I will come back. Do not worry. And then when she starts having feelings for Malcolm, she's like, okay, whatever comes out of this, like, I will get him out of this situation. As soon as my hands are no longer tied by things, I will come and free him. And then when she thinks that somebody has been like scratched by this creature that's going to turn them, she's literally like, I'm going to lock you up, but don't worry, I'm going to go find a cure. Like, she is just always like, okay, like, I will do whatever it takes to do what I need to do. And I just thought that was so great. So anyway, I really like this one. This is definitely my favorite of the new crop of them that I'm reading. And I would say probably my third favorite in the series. I'm feeling it. I really like this couple. This is probably one of my favorite paranormal romances I've ever read. So yeah, I think it's like a 4.5 star. This also gives me momentum. I'm like, I just want to finish these last two. Like, there's also just like this compulsively readable quality to these books. So all that to say, I think I'm just going to keep pushing on with Sweet Ruin and Wicked Abyss and start landing this plane. So, oh, and by the way, this also like completely validated my decision not to read all of Torture Island, because yikes, I do not want to read a book about vivisection with Regan and Declan. Like, no thanks there. Hey guys, another day, another book. Sweet Ruin. Okay, so I think I'm on the 6th chapter. I have been doing dishes and listening to the audiobook, so not totally sure, but I'm on chapter 6-ish, and I'm really into this one. Though I can already tell Kresley Cole is going to break my little heart with our girl Jo, because her backstory is just heartbreaking. I'm not even totally sure what she is. I think she's like a vampire phantom, and she's a phantom. I don't know how that would have happened based on what we know about the world so far, but anyway, she was killed and resurrected, and she was homeless taking care of her baby brother, and like that whole thing was really tragic. And yeah, anyway, so she's Thad's big sister who we've seen before, and I think that this is the beginning of the third movement in the series, where there's these Moriori who are all, I guess, sort of like primordial immortal creatures, like they're the first of their kind, or like an early version of their kind, and therefore like the most powerful. And I don't know what they're up to, but they're coming back to our realm, to the realm of Earth, for some kind of plan. And Rune seems like a real tool, but he also seems like he has some like real attachment issues, because his blood is poisonous, or like his bodily excretions are poisonous. He will kill anybody he kisses, or like, I don't know. So anyway, seems like he's real fucked up. That's par for the course in IAD world. And all that to say, I'm into it. I'm going to keep listening to the audiobook, and we will see how I do. So I'll check in later. Okay, guys, this is some dark and kinky shit. Yeah, I don't even know where to start. So there is an interesting element in this one, which is normally in a romance novel of any kind, there's definitely a big stigma around seeing either of the main characters with other people, unless it's like some sort of menage or like poly kind of situation. It's sort of just like not usually what's done. But because of the main character or the main dude's kind of like sexual proclivities or like needs or whatever, like literally the first time she sees him is him having a fivesome with a bunch of nymphs. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. And then she's super powerful. I really like her. Him, I'm a little more iffy on. And I can tell that I'm likely going to think that the grovel does not match the crime, just based on how things are progressing. That is going to be my guess. But I'm into this one. I don't think I'm liking it as much as Demon from the Dark, but I really like Josie. Like Josephine, I'm not totally sure exactly what her preferred name is, but really like the main female lead. Main dude, I'm a little not as much on.
Man, okay, so I just polished this guy off. I have been going back and forth with the audio in this book all day today as I've been going about my business. Okay, so I have like a journey with this book. I think I would land on like a 4-star for this. I was kind of between 3.5 or 4 stars, and I feel in some ways similarly about this book as I did about Kiss from a Demon King or Kiss of a Demon King, whatever that was. I think that on like a technical level, this is like a feat that has been executed well. On a personal level, the amount of angst that happens in this book is just not necessarily like what I would normally pick taste-wise, but I just can't deny that this is a really well done version of a very high angst paranormal romance. And the reason this is so high angst is that like a huge piece of the conflict between the two main characters is that the dude is a demon, or at least half dark fae, half demon, and the demon side of him is like compulsively like needs sex a lot to thrive. He has been using that to like in the capacity of being like a spy, and he has built up a lot of his identity around using his sexual prowess to get information from people, especially from nymphs, even though he increasingly is having feelings for the heroine, who I love, by the way. The heroine in this, Josie, has to be like one of the very best characters in this entire series. Like, she is great. And she is I also just love she's no bullshit and very straightforward with her feelings. And she's like, look, I am pretty darn sure that we are fated mates. And as soon as we have sex, we'll find out that we're fated mates. And I just like, my parameters of us fully having sex are that you have accepted that we are going to have a monogamous relationship. And so there's a lot of push-pull of him not understanding why she needs or wants monogamy from him, even if he were to continue to have sex sort of in a utilitarian capacity. So basically what I think is on a technical level very admirable about this is the hero having a persistent desire to cheat, basically, which is like verboten in a romance novel. And that, I think, being executed pretty well. I will also say that I think the grovel mostly matches the crime in this situation. Like, I mostly buy the grovel, especially because of the way the crime unfolds. But it is emotional. And I mean, hey, that says a lot about her skill as an author that I was so emotionally invested in it. Sometimes in these books, as I think you've heard me say over and over again, there's a little bit of an imbalance there, how much punishment the heroines are getting relative to the grovel or the payoff later. I think we were in the middle of the kind of betrayal moment happening or the crime happening. I was like, oh, okay, this is going to go down to a 3.5. But I do think that the grovel mostly bought it back for me. And I think the fact that Josie is such a self-possessed heroine and like feels like she is in control of the situation, both like on a power level, like she is one of the most powerful creatures we've ever encountered in these books,
but also just like she is somebody who's incredibly emotionally strong, and you've seen her have an incredibly profound loss already. So I guess I didn't feel like I knew she was going to be able to figure out how to go on if Rune betrayed her, which obviously like completely abandoned her, betrayed her, whatever. Obviously that wasn't going to happen because it's a romance novel, but Kresley Cole sold me on her strength as a character to continue on, so it didn't feel as intense as maybe it could have. I don't know. All that to say, I did ultimately quite like this, especially for how angsty of a book it is and how tricky the subject matter is. 4 stars for this one. I'm not sure where I'll put it in my ranking. I mean, I think it's up there. This is a really good book. It's just slightly too angsty for my taste. So all that to say, we are now at the point where I have completed the books I originally set out for myself in this project. However, I already have Wicked Abyss as audio from my library, so I will read that as my last book. But I do want to pause and bask in the accomplishment of officially catching up with the books that I wanted to catch up with. And yeah, we're getting close. We're rounding the bend here. So 1 more book to go. Okay, it's a gross ass day, but it's also the day that I'm going to finish catching up with Immortals After Dark. So I am starting Wicked Abyss today. I am excited. I'm going to do this purely through audio because I don't own the ebook or the physical book. What I've been doing the last few BT dubs is I found that I like listening to going back and forth, but really listening to at least the first 30% on audio because it helps me get in to the book. I've also found in general that recently that if I listen to the first 20 to 30% in audiobook, it helps me get fully into everything. So anyway, side note there. Yeah, I'm excited to catch up. I'm excited to be done. Wish me luck. I'm hoping for sufficient grovel to crime ratio in this one, so we'll see how that goes. So I was able to listen to a good bit of the audiobook today. I'm not loving this one, I gotta be honest. There are interesting ideas in this. There's a lot of play with the ideas of Disney princess, and this is very clearly a Beauty and the Beast retelling, so I think that stuff is interesting. I guess I'm just not connected with the story, to be totally honest, and find the hero's conflict to be kind of bullshit, so I don't know. We'll see how things progress. I do like the main heroine, Lila. I like her. This is they're fated mates, but she's a reincarnate. This is the second time we've gotten a reincarnate in the IAD universe. She's a reincarnate, and there was something she did in her first incarnation to her fated mate that he finds unforgivable. And I guess it's not good, but I don't know. So we'll see how it goes. For now, good but not great for me. Okay, so I am done with the book. It's a few days later, not sure how long later, but yeah, I finished it up today at work while I was working on a few deliverables. I ended up quite liking it. It's definitely not a favorite in the series for me, Wicked Abyss, but the ending I really liked, and that makes me like the book in whole more. So I really like Lila as a character. I like the whole play with fairy tales in this. I think the ending was great in terms of sort of a direct pastiche of the Disney Beauty and the Beast ending. I thought that was great. I ended up quite liking the book. It's not, to my mind, a great entry in this series. I think it's fine. It's fun. We get to see more of Elixia, who I really like. She is constantly upset about the fact that the witches on Earth have not been paying their taxes, and she wants to come revoke their powers. So anytime she's on the page, I really like her. I like getting to know all of the Morior, I'm getting more into their vibe. And yeah, I think that the introduction of the Morior definitely adds a layer of complexity thematically to the series in terms of who is really good and who's really bad, because I think up until this point in getting ready for the accession, I had a pretty specific idea of what the good side is versus the bad side. And now I think that's getting complicated. So I like that in terms of the overall series management. In terms of why MUNRO's book would be next, that I don't know. And I guess probably it's time for me to start landing this plane. So I'll, mostly save some of my thoughts or where I'm at with the series for a wrap up. But basically, I think this book is fine. It's not one of the best books in the series, I don't think, but it's fun. And I think it's a more approachable
version of IAD? It's hard to say. This is a hard series to... Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, maybe I just need to throw you to the wrap up because I think most of what I have left to say is more meta. But anyway, all that to say, I think I'll give this like 3.5 stars. I think the ending boosted it from a 3-star for me. And yeah, not one of the best, but like definitely solid version of this series. Yeah, I just finished doing my taxes and it's time for me to go to bed. So I will catch you guys to wrap this long ass vlog up. Okay guys, it's Saturday, a few days later, and it is time to land this plane because I started editing the footage together and homegirl apparently has all the things to say about this series. And so I don't want to make this video too much longer, but I do have things I want to say to wrap things up. So let's start with just sort of like overall impressions. So now that I have finished as much of this series that I plan to finish, I can tell you that I enjoy this series. It's definitely not like a new favorite series, though I did find, I think, some books that I really enjoyed as a part of finishing up the series. Absolutely, unquestionably, my favorite book from this batch of reading was Demon from the Dark. That was 4.5 stars. And then right behind it, I would say, are Sweet Ruin and Pleasure of a Dark Prince. I would say overall, I liked Pleasure of a Dark Prince more from start to finish, but in terms of like there are higher highs in Sweet Ruin for me than Pleasures of a Dark Prince. So I don't know, I would say those two are definitely my next two, and everything else was just sort of like fine to okay. Like the rest of the things I read were fine. I am very thankful for the Fated Mates podcast in helping me figure out where I personally wanted/needed to stop and start this series. I think that was very helpful in feeling confident about what books I did and didn't want to read. And really that was the goal of this project, was doing something with all these books that I had in this series. Now, taking a step back in terms of just, overall ranking, I wouldn't say Demon from the Dark is my favorite book in the series as a whole, but I would put it in my top. So I would say Bowen and Mariquetta are definitely, I'm gonna say, my favorite in the series because that is one of my all-time favorite speculative romances, followed very closely, I would say, by A Hunger Like No Other. I really do love Lachlan and Emma. And then I would say Malcolm and Caro are right behind them. So those are clearly my 3 favorites. I think all of the ones that I've given 4 stars to, I really enjoy. I definitely have a lot of affection for a lot of those couples. They're books that I would reread. Anything lower than a 4, I don't know that I would ever reread and wouldn't like necessarily go out of my way to recommend to people, just they didn't work as well for me, but I don't think they're bad. So that's kind of where I landed in terms of overall experience of the series. And then thinking about just like how I would describe this series now that I've read most of it, all of it that I'm going to read until new books come out. I would describe this as a series that has a lot of high highs, but is quite uneven. So like I would humbly quite disagree with the Fated Mates podcast in the sense of saying like Kresley Cole is a master, like she can do no wrong. I mean, they don't quite say that, but they're clearly very admiring of her as a writer and feel like this series kind of top to bottom is pretty strong. And I would disagree with that. I do think Kresley Cole, I think one thing that I really appreciate now, having gotten through more of these books, is that she has a very high level of difficulty of task that she sets herself for her books. She sets up premises that are real hard to pull off. And when she does pull them off, I think they're really satisfying. Like, I think the top 3 that I mentioned, my favorites, I think all of those have a pretty high level of difficulty in terms of executing them and having me believe it. And I think in those cases, she does pull it off. I do think, though, that if you don't like angst, and if you are someone who feels like the grovel has to match the crime, there are going to be lows in this series for you, because I just very frequently find that, and I should say, part of like the level of difficulty she set for herself is that she has correctly identified the fact that, okay, if 2 people are fated mates and they are both immortals, so they both know that they are each other's fated mates, like how do you develop conflict? And I think she does a good job of being very aware of that. My difficulty with her is I think sometimes the way she chooses to introduce conflict is to basically really put her characters through the ringer, especially her heroines,
And I don't know that she always like, so she racks up a high bill, and I don't always know that she has the check to pay it off. Like she can't always cash the check she writes. And that's really what this boils down to. So like, for example, Sabine in Kiss of a Demon King. Is that what that one's called? I can never remember these titles. I loved her. Am I totally sold on everything that she's gone through in her backstory? Because that's the other thing. She also gives all of these characters such tortured backstories. And especially as the series goes on, she is frequently having her male characters be the victims of childhood sexual predators in a way that is not on page, but is a really intense backstory to give someone. And I do think that she often will use the fact that that backstory is so hard, so intense, so awful to excuse the hero's current behavior. I basically am just not down with that. And I think it for some readers that will work. For me, your backstory of course adds to your character and adds to your motivations, but it often reads to me like she uses that in place of making the hero sufficiently grovel for how he then subsequently treats the heroine. Like, for example, this is one of the better examples, I think, of figuring out how to make the grovel pretty much match what the hero does, because the thing that he does to the heroine is not physically harming her, he's emotionally harming her. And when he realizes that, like, he has a very clear connecting the dots moment of saying, oh my gosh, okay, now I understand what she was trying to communicate, of the fact that she was hurt and why she was hurt, and I can now empathetically imagine that I would also be hurt by that. As soon as that happens, he changes his behavior, and he demonstrates, I think, to her that he says the words also to her, that he now understands why that was hurtful to her. He very clearly demonstrates that he's not going to do that again. And, you know, I think because the length of the duration of that betrayal is not that long, I think in this case, it gets pulled off. It's a good grovel to crime ratio. Similarly in Demon from the Dark, I think that even though Malcolm does have a certain coldness towards Caro, he is not, as soon as he understands what her motivations were in the situation, he fully switches into protective mode. And he's not putting her in he's not physically tormenting her. It's an emotional withhold that he has. And it's a much more understandable and reasonable emotional withhold. I think that book balances the power dynamics in terms of magical abilities, physical exchanges between them, and emotional dynamics really, really well. And so it feels satisfying. The problem for me comes in many of these books. The hero is physically imperiling the heroine and never really, in my opinion, makes up for that sufficiently. And I think they even talked about this in the podcast at one point, but often the grovel is meant to come through his actions, but not saying the words. And I just don't think that that's enough, honestly, for me as a reader, at least. I would say that basically the pro of Kresley's books is that they're different and she will go there. The cons is she doesn't always stick the landing. And the other con I want to mention, if you couldn't tell through all this, is that every single one of these books needs a huge content warning. There is so much physical and sexual violence in these books, either on or off page, and you 100% need to be aware of that for every single book. Just assume that at some point that will be a part of the story, and if that's something you don't want to read, I would not advise picking up this series. People I do advise this for are people who can handle some angst, people who are okay with, exploring power dynamics in a really challenging way. Also, these books are incredibly bingeable. So even ones that I don't enjoy as much, I do get through them very quickly. And you saw, I thought that this project might take me months, and I just picked up Steve and couldn't put them down. So I think she 100% has a very bingeable quality to her books that I think is just fun. If you're looking for a series to just dig into, I think this one, if it works for you, will be one that you can, be getting through pretty quickly. And then, the other thing that I really admire from her, now I will tell you, I think that it's time for her to land this plane in terms of the overall arc management. And I think in contrast to both Ilona Andrews and Nalini Singh, who I think always shows you that they have everything under control. They have a plan of how they're getting through their macro arcs. While I do think that now, especially in the later books, it's very clear that she has some macro arcs in mind, I do think that she isn't as masterful with that. What she is very good at doing, however, is managing concurrent plot lines that are happening over multiple books. So I think she does a really good job of like having 3 or 4 books that end up happening roughly at the same time, exploring the same events several times from different points of view and making that interesting. I think she handles that really well. And I think she also does a really good job of planting seeds of interest for other things that are going on or will go on in different books. However, I would say at this point, it's just so clear that she's not as interested in this series as she used to be. I mean, it's been years since the last one. If I were her, my humble suggestion to her from reader to author is to pick maybe 3 or 4 more full books. I think that she needs to just like commit to a series of novellas to tie off some of the things that she has kind of promised implicitly to the readership in terms of some of the couples or events that she is clearly setting up. I would say that there's easily like 10 books or 10 stories that have been hinted to that people want. And I just, based on the pace of them coming out, I don't think that that's doable. So I would suggest that, my humble suggestion, pick 3 or 4 to be full books, and in between every one, release 2 novellas, wrap this up in the next 7 or 8 years and move on, because it's just been dragging out a real long time at this point. I think that that would be a happy resolution for all parties involved. So all that to say, I'm caught up on this series. I would recommend this series. I still like this series. I do think that it's not necessarily a beginner's level. At least some of these books aren't. But yeah, if you're interested in it, I'd say give it a try with the caveats that I've mentioned throughout this video. I think that does it for this vlog. So if you have read the Immortals After Dark series in part or in full, definitely let me know your thoughts about the series below. You've heard me reference it throughout, I highly recommend the Fated Mates podcast. Even if you have no interest in these books, I think it's an interesting book discussion of this series. Even if you agree or disagree, I definitely disagreed with them at some points, but I found it a very helpful kind of like sounding board throughout my journey. So I will definitely leave a link to that podcast below. Highly recommend it. I've very much been enjoying the second season, which is more like getting into old school romances. I just enjoy that podcast in general. So definitely recommend that to you guys below. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And yeah, if you enjoyed this long ass video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below. And I think that that will do it. I hope you are having an absolutely lovely day, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye.